From Fremont, California, this is the Smokie Podcast, a production of the Smoke Signal covering everything from student life to what's happening in the world, all in short 20-minute episodes. I'm Bryan Xiong, the web co-editor of the Smoke Signal. I'd like to welcome you to the second episode of Season 4 of the Smokie Podcast. On this episode, members of the Smoke Signal discuss media literacy, spotting misinformation and fact-checking sources, as well as how to be more media literate.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Smokie Podcast. My name is Sahas and I'm a second year staff writer and business manager at the Smoke Signal.
Hello, I'm Praamesh and I'm a first year staff writer.
Hi, I'm Vidyuth and I'm a first year staff writer.
Callie, I'm a staff writer and Jennie at the Smoke Signal. On today's episode of the Smokie Podcast, we'll be discussing all things related to media literacy from a journalistic perspective, and how to find misinformation and fact-check sources to general advice on being more media literate as high school students.
So misinformation is one of the biggest issues in the world today. We live in a digital culture and news spreads really quickly through social media, and there's a big dark side to social media because people tend to believe the first thing they hear without fact-checking sources. And there's been lots of bad rumors, things like that spread, including the election was rigged or the pandemic was planned. And now Sahas will also be talking more about this.
Yeah, I know it's definitely a thing I see in like messaging groups, especially my parents and grandparents and WhatsApp and WeChat. So someone will create like an infographic that has some questionable information on it, and then that'll get forwarded through many groups. And it's kind of like one of those message chains where people will forward it to maybe like 10 or 20 other people who will then forward it and so on. And a lot of the time, people won't take the time to fact check these, so they'll just like take the information as granted and then move on with that. So that leads to a very like easy spread of misinformation.
Yeah, I agree. This happens to me a lot as well. My parents will tend to send me things that aren't always true, and they always get fooled by like some of the strong words in the headlines and things like that. And it's important to always stay objective and look at the facts. Don't just appeal to like emotion. Like they'll use big words, but it doesn't always mean anything. You should always try and check multiple sources before you believe something.
Yeah, other than just WhatsApp, also like Facebook posts a huge amount of parents like now they think that Facebook is like they get their main source of news from Facebook, which is kind of like hit or miss because a lot of the times they're the people themselves that post Facebook don't have their sources from those WhatsApp WeChat kind of questionable source messages. So it's really just a cycle of it goes from what could be a small group chat message to a really big platform of thousands of people seeing this one Facebook post and may or may not be true.
Yeah, and especially because like a lot of social media platforms now, they prioritize trend cycles and just gaining more retention. Like as Praamesh said before, where you have like all of these buzzwords in order to get the audience to actually see what the post is at first. And then it'll just keep on continuing or just watching like a 30-second video and then another 30-second video on the topic, and then you just keep on scrolling. And all of this is usually done without researching or reading up on the same topic from other sources. So you're only able to really get one side of the story, such as from like TikTok or Instagram.
Yeah, and also when you're constantly supplied with new posts, new information, and new topics in the form of short form content, like Instagram is always re-scrolling, TikTok is always re-scrolling. It's easy to keep seeing what you take at face value rather than critically thinking about what you're consuming because there's always something new. And that's when media literacy is so vital in this digital world where social media is still at the forefront of people's lives.
Yeah, definitely. But since there's like good and bad to both sides, it's also good to have these kind of short form contents because there's more media able to be introduced to the public. It's also bad because it does reduce the amount of time spent covering other stories or going more in depth with them.
Yeah, but also I think it's really important to look at not just how the public can look at social media and combat misinformation, but also how do media institutions from our end, as for example from the Smoke Signal, combat misinformation.
Yeah, because definitely oftentimes for articles I spend like at least like multiple hours compiling all of my sources on an RE25 or a first rough draft to make sure I'm getting all of my facts straight, such as the wolf washing washes away the core social issues for the opinion section.
So the Smoke Signal combats misinformation in many ways. One of the things that we do is we always have multiple drafts of each article, and we always try and double check our sources. As I mentioned previously, you should always try and check multiple sources before like believing something and sending that article or other source to other people. Because if you don't, then they might believe this false info and then send it to other people, and this can lead to a chain reaction, which is not good. Um, and we also have copy editors at the Smoke Signal who also verify before we release any article, because integrity is really important, and we are really dedicated towards providing accurate information.
Yeah, so I will continue to speak about sources because I think that's a major thing. But I just want to dive in here since we were talking about media for a bit, and I want to talk about AI and media. So we've probably all heard of ChatGPT and the general chatbot guys that a lot of companies have been using, but mostly to increase consumer engagement because you don't need to have a person responding when a chatbot can. But AI media can also generate posts, as you guys may have seen. Like ChatGPT can write very human sounding articles and human sounding words. And when these types of language models are used to create new posts on social media, they can create misinformation. So if you guys have ever tried using ChatGPT for something really technical, it'll definitely give you a lot of wrong facts. And seeing this potential is something that we ourselves need to see as humans who are reading these posts. Of course, it's really difficult to identify a post that's been written by an AI, so this is definitely a work in progress that I guess we can't really do much about right now, but it's an issue that we should be aware of at the very least.
Yeah, and especially considering ChatGPT and other AI models, it's important to think of how these AI models were only trained by humans, and with the thousands of things, what humans might search up from cats to the latest news to many articles. It's really important to remember that there's no way that all of their training was factual. So thus, whenever they spit out nothing, it's really important to double check that what it is factual as well.
And especially because what they said is really true, because all of this bias that goes into creating AI algorithms really messes up with the kind of environment you're in when you're scrolling through social media. Because AI algorithms end up creating an echo chamber since lots of social media platforms have an algorithm that's specifically tailored to the user's interest. So the data that they collect when they see that the viewer is like specifically viewing these videos over some others, it just pushes content that is adjacent to these interests, but not exactly. So it keeps you scrolling, and as more stuff is recommended, you're kind of diverted into what these algorithms want you to see. So more stuff is recommended, and you get like deeper into a rabbit hole.
Right. So the social media actually creates a rabbit hole, the AI trains on that rabbit hole, and it creates an even deeper rabbit hole. But yeah, as we talked about, it is very difficult to identify this. And since this is a newer technology, we're still kind of waiting and seeing how this is going to develop. But as of now, there are some other countermeasures like GPT-0, which is trying to identify ChatGPT written text. But that itself is also not very accurate. So this is definitely something that it's once again a developing field that we need to see.
So some of the things that I do outside of the smoke signal to like make sure I'm getting reliable information is that I always look for bias to see if they use like strong language or things like that. And I also like to see if the author is a credible source. Some of the credible sources that I use are like New York Times, things like that. Because some people just want to convey their opinion and influence others to believe a certain thing, even though it's not true. So it's important to see how the author structures their article and to see if they're just trying to use emotion or if they're using like statistics or other things to try and back up their claim.
Right, because all sources do have bias, of course. This is not something that people can avoid, but that doesn't really make them unreadable. We just need to know what we're reading, what they're biased towards, and what we should be taking and believing as at face value.
Yeah. I also think though that it's really, really important to the impact of double checking sources is really important. It takes maybe 5 seconds to copy paste the source code and Google it to see whether it's factual. But that 5 seconds not doing it, you could the impact of passing that article on and then how many people are reading that article and then passing it on. So taking the time to check what you're reading prevents other people from reading that misinformation and preventing it from being seen as fact.
Yeah, I think especially if you're either like the one that's sending these articles to other people or you are the one viewing these articles, it's really important to kind of analyze what kind of rhetoric or wording is being used. So that's why it's necessary to get your news from like a wide variety of resources in order to get like a fuller or better picture of the story or event.
Right. Leading into that, I think that as we talked about social media earlier, it's also important to not just look for tailored content from whatever your news provider is. For example, Google and Apple both have their respective news platforms where they will make personalized news for you based on what you have read in the past. And while this is helpful if, in order to learn more about whatever you're interested in, it also leads to you getting kind of a narrow tunnel vision of news events because you'll only be getting the things that you're most interested in and you'd be missing out on other things that could be happening around you. And I think that like personalized news can definitely be a good start point, but it's definitely not an end point. Because as you keep going into research, you'll keep finding that a lot of sources are just based on other sources. They're not original content. And original reporting, as we have talked about in previous smoke signal articles, is kind of dying. So as you keep going down into that research rabbit hole, I guess you would eventually hit an endpoint where you hit a primary source, like a direct interview, a direct picture, a direct report of an eyewitness, journalist. And I think that's where you can really say that like I've hit that point, I can stop now doing research because up till then everything else was just based on something else. And I know that like in our like day and age we can't always afford to spend that time. But unless we are doing that, I don't think we can ever say what like whatever source this is fully really reliable or like fully a source in itself.
Yeah, and it definitely does take a lot of dedication and generosity and integrity to combat misinformation. But it's important to also think from a college perspective of why is the media becoming more sensational? Why is more misinformation being reported? And like Sahas mentioned, it really comes down to news is dying in a way. The economic decline of news is a big part of why you see a lot more sensational content on news. So thinking about all these sort of macro ways that news is really affected and can really help us with the more micro ways of combating misinformation.
All right. So yeah, we definitely talked about many different things today. We started off talking about like just like general misinformation that we've seen. We've talked about why this could be happening and ways that we could combat it through our research and being more selective in how we choose to read news. So I hope you guys learned something new today. I know I did. And thanks for listening to us today and stay tuned for the next episode of Smokie Podcast.
For more content about the Smoke Signal, visit our website at www.thesmokesignal.org. To our listeners, thank you for taking time out of your day and tuning in to this episode of the Smokie Podcast. We had a great time and hope all of you did.
We want to thank Praamesh Siva, Vidyuth Sridhar, Callie Yuan, and Sahas Goli for joining us on this episode of the Smokie Podcast. Our background music is produced by The Crembo, and our show is edited by Jennie Wang and Bryan. See you next time on the Smokie Podcast.